Welcome back to the show today. Today we're talking with Charles Stickney, who is the creator of Boy Dash, and he is currently running another Kickstarter for, I believe it's issue 8. So I thought it'd be a perfect time to see if he'd be interested in chatting about the book. And luckily, we have him here, so let's bring him in, find out about him and his project. How's it going, Charles?
It's going great today. How are you?
Oh, I'm living the dream, nightmare, waking purgatory.
What part of the country are you in? I hope you're not affected by the hurricane or anything that's going on right
No,
now.
I'm in upstate New York.
Okay, all right. Well,
So
like for anyone who is watching for the hurricane, I hope the recovery goes quickly, and that your living situation is as back to normal as it can be as soon as possible.
definitely, and I know that a few people who I'm friends with on Facebook are dealing with that, and it's really sucks. And hopefully, things will be better soon.
Yes, for sure. But,
Um, so before we get talking about White Ash, tell me a little bit about yourself. What is your origin story as a comic book reader and creator?
Growing up, I was a huge comic book fan in the late 80s, early 90s, to the point that when I was in college, my thought was, I am going to be a comic book writer. And even then, I had aspirations of being a comic book inker. And when I was in college, I interned at Marvel. So that was very much like path A. But I was also a film major, and that was path A1. And as I was leaving, getting ready to graduate from college, I got a job offer in Los Angeles. So I ended up moving out to Los Angeles. I worked in film, animation, and all kinds of independent film for 20 years. And during that time, I still loved comic books. I still wanted to get back to doing comics. And, the industry out here was changing, where everything was starting to become based on some pre-existing books or comics. And it reached a point where, as I was pitching scripts, I kept getting that message, hey, if this was based on something, maybe we'd be more interested. And I started thinking about it, and I thought to myself, you know what? Maybe I'll just make some things and see how that goes. If it gets turned into something down the line, great. But I have all these ideas that would make fantastic comic books. So about 7.5 years ago, I came up with the idea for White Ash. And I found an artist, Conor Hughes, and a colorist, Fin Cramb, and we put the first issue out on Kickstarter, where it did pretty well. For 2017, we had about 300 backers. It was a great first campaign. But from there, the series just started building and building. And our fan base started growing. At some point, Scout Comics was interested. They asked me if they could distribute it, which then led to talks to eventually me becoming publisher of Scout Comics for a couple of years. And then, I realized I was reaching a point where it was getting a little bit harder for me to sort of balance duties as publisher with growing, the thing that I love, which was White Ash, Galarian, the game, all these other worlds. And so I said, you guys do your thing. I'm going to go do my thing. And so about 2.5 years ago, I left Scout and I went in full time building White Ash Comics as a little bit more of a boutique publishing label for both myself. And at this point, we're starting to bring in some other people to play in the universe. And since 2017, we've become one of the biggest brands that you will find on Kickstarter. And right now, we're running our campaign for Chapter 8. It's a campaign where you can also catch up on everything. It's over 600 pages worth of White Ash story at this point, because these are all gigantic issues, almost like mini graphic novels. And yeah, we're live. We're 3 days in, and also off to another great start.
So, kind of give us the overview of White Ash and kind of the inspiration behind behind it.
So White Ash is a grounded modern day fantasy universe. The quick pitch I like to use is it's Romeo and Juliet meets Lord of the Rings in rural Pennsylvania. Or imagine if the guys from Supernatural got stuck in Riverdale, but rather than battling demons from hell, they had to deal with the worst of Mordor. So grounded fantasy in coal mining country. And it follows a young man, Alec, who comes from a family of coal miners. The last thing he wants to be is a coal miner. So he's like, hey, Dad, I'm going off to college. But before he can leave, there's an accident at the coal mine. His dad's hurt, keeps him in town for a couple days. He meets this lovely young woman. There are crazy sparks flying between the two of them. But unfortunately, her psychopath of a father, Thane, owns the coal mine. And, he doesn't want a coal miner's son dating his daughter. It feels like this tale of class. But that's where these fantasy elements start coming in. You realize there's something so much more going on with the town and with the world of White Ash. And so those were the humble beginnings. We also have a spin-off series about Glarian, the world's most dangerous elf, kind of like the John Wick of our universe. We've got her origin story. And as part of this Kickstarter campaign, we have an ash can for our LA Comic-Con exclusive, which is a teaser for a new Glarian tale that we're coming out with in 2025, which will be a one-shot, which like a 44 or 48-page one-shot, which is called Glarian and Thane, which is the love story, origin story of the White Ash's very first couple. So it's a huge tapestry, which goes back about 3,000 years ago, but most of it is set modern day in rural Pennsylvania. So, if you want high fantasy or modern fantasy, we have you covered. And it's all one big story, but you can kind of drop in and read this part if this is more your thing. If you like something that's more in the Game of Thrones vein, that's Glarian. If you like something that's a little bit more, I would guess, Buffy-ish, that's kind of White
Mm-hmm.
Ash or Supernatural-ish.
So you've kind of already talked about the main characters, but tell us a little bit, maybe a little bit more about them, and how were they, who maybe the inspirations for them, were.
Sure. So I originally spent a lot of time writing romantic comedies back when people were actually making romantic comedies. They're having a little bit of a comeback now on Netflix, but in
Mhm.
the early aughts, late 90s, there were all these wonderful films like Serendipity or French Kiss or Click or Liar Liar, which were these, I like to say, genre-based rom-coms where there was a little bit of a magical twist, but it was really about the will they, won't they, push and pull of the characters. So that's kind of always where I've been situated in terms of my mindset when I'm building a world is that you want to have characters that people care about, that they care about where they're going, what they're doing, because that's what's going to get you invested in the world and the story. And so I always try to create very real, grounded characters that are dealing with some of those issues. White Ash also in general is a little bit of an immigrant story. It's about second generation immigrants. Like I said before, we've got elves, we've got dwarves, set in
Mhm.
rural Pennsylvania. But it's more about the children of these people trying to deal with their own legacy, whether they want to follow in the path of their parents. And I think this is like a decision that a lot of us make when we're coming from a small town. Do you walk that route, or do you leave the small town? Do you go somewhere? Do you go off to college? Do you try to forge your own path? And I think that's for a lot of people that thing that you're wrestling with around 18 to 22, and that's a big theme for the series. But like the main characters, you have Alec, the son of a coal miner. You have Lillian, who is this young woman who's basically grew up in a bubble of privilege. But with that, it's also been a very constricted privilege where she's almost like that princess in the castle that the king has been keeping safe. And she just can't wait to get out and start living her own life. So you've got the two of them colliding. You have the second generation of the parents who have very specific, rigid ideas about what their children should be doing. So there's that push and pull. You have, there's another character in the town, Catelyn, who has been friends with Alex since, basically since they were children, and has had a crush on him since he could walk. And so there's a little bit of a love triangle between her and Lillian. But each character is also really well rounded and fits a very specific purpose, both in terms of the story and also the emotional counterbalance that I'm trying to establish with the characters.
Now, is there a character that through the 8 issues you've grown, attached to, or you know, when you started out, they were just kind of there filling a role, and now that you've had a chance to, develop them, that want to do more with them, in the future.
Oh, for sure. And I think like the biggest recipient of this is Glarian. Because in the original telling of the tale, as I was getting started, she's a character that we see very briefly in the third issue of White Ash, and but she made such an impression, and she was a big piece of the past, and I wasn't really telling so much of the story of the past right now. There was such a reaction to her, that character, that fans wanted more, and so we started doing these short stories with Glarian that became very popular, and so that led to her getting her own spin-off series. Um, and so at this point, there's almost as much Glarian material as there is White Ash material.
Mhm.
The Glarian material is slightly more adult. Like I said, it's more of the high fantasy Game of Thrones, whereas the White Ash is more like in the PG-13 range. Glarian is a little bit more R rated. And so I think like there's a lot of overlap between the two audiences, but Glarian's been able to carve out her own niche in the White Ash universe and bring in a lot of new fans. So especially with this campaign, you have White Ash, but Glarian makes an appearance in this issue. You also have our Ash Can that features a new Glarian tale. So yes, specifically Glarian, but I'll be honest, it's a lot of fun being able to tell a large story over the years. So the more years that I do this, the more chances I get to develop other characters, and I have ideas for, okay, this character will have a mini series down the road, and things like that. And because our fan base keeps growing, it's a wonderful place to be as a creator, because you can plot out all these intricate side stories that you can get to, because the people keep coming back and really seem to enjoy what we're creating.
So, I know you've already mentioned them, but tell us a little bit more about the rest of the creative team, your artist, and the letterer and all that. And sounds like you guys were friends before you guys started doing this.
Well, so way back when, in like 2016, as I was gearing up for this, I actually put out a call for artists, and I received about 100 different portfolios. Thankfully, at the time, one of my best friends worked in animation. He was an animation director, and so he helped me look through all the different portfolios. And he was like, "Oh, this guy." He's like, "Forget everybody else. Who is this guy? This guy, Conor Hughes." And at the time, no one knew who Conor was. He'd come from the School of Visual Design, and thought that maybe he should get a more, at the time he thought, adult job. And so he ended up getting a day job working as a graphic designer for the UN. Like that was his day job. Uh, he submitted and was one of the winners of the first Mark Millar talent search. They paired him with a colorist that really didn't showcase his style well, and so no one found him after that. Flash forward a year later, I come across his portfolio. He's amazing. We start talking. He's an amazing human in addition to an artist, and we started building this world together. And Fin Cramb, who was the colorist on White Ash, also just a great guy. And so I struck gold from the beginning, working with some incredibly talented people who are also wonderful humans. Since then, we brought in a much bigger repertoire of people to work in the universe. Conor has gone on to do a lot of, Skybound loves Conor right now. He's done a bunch of covers for Void Rivals, for Walking Dead. He's got a big project that I can't talk about right now that he's also doing on the side, which is one of the reasons why we brought in another artist to help us with this issue. And that's Julian Shaw, who does a lot of stuff for Marvel, for Spider-Boy, for Moon Knight. So he's been working for Marvel. He is going to be helping Conor out with the art duties in this issue. We also have this incredible artist, Tango, who I've been working with, who did a cover for the book. And Tango also is doing layouts with Julian. So together they are helping out in the back half of the issue. Fin Cramb is still coloring everything to sort of tie it into that White Ash universe. So it's a really amazing team that I get to work with. And I have just been very fortunate as a comic creator to work with some of the best up and coming artists who have become well-known artists as we've been working together.
So tell me a little bit about the process for writing. Do you have like when you're writing, do you have a set time? Do you sit down and write, or do you have to wait till kind of you get an idea and then have to do that? And
Well, so I have two children. And I think when you become a parent with children, time becomes more precious. And, my kids are now 12 and 15, but we went through that period where writing was more triage, when I had 15 minutes here that was free to myself, that was when something would get done. So I'm well past the point where I have to have a set schedule. It's
Mhm.
a little bit more for me because I also function as a publisher at this point, where it's here's a list of all the 100 things I have to do. What's the most important thing to clear off the plate? And oh, now we need a script, so we'll do the script. Now we need to work on fulfillment. Now you need to work on development for this other project. I need to send out these emails. We need to do promotion this week. Oh, we have a convention coming up. So for me, I really wish there are the days that you're like, okay, I'm going to write from 10 a.m. to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, take a break for lunch, and that's my day. But because I wear so many different hats, it's really I might write Monday, and then I might not write again till Friday, or I might not write again to the following Friday, depending on what the schedule is. And so it's just kind of just juggling and figuring out what's the most important. Like for me this week, we have LA Comic Con on Friday. I had the Kickstarter launch on Monday. So like those things are taking up all the time. I think the
Right.
writer's hat will come back on in about 2 weeks as I start looking at the game 4, which is another series that we do. So Connor will have that to work on. I have to give notes to another person, and this is the other thing is at this point I'm also bringing in other writers to work in the world. Lane Morgan, who's a TV writer, she was working on CW's Legacies and some other things. She came on to script this issue of Galarian and Thane. I provided an outline, and then she wrote the issue. So so I'm doing things like that, but we had a White Ash annual that came out last summer, or a couple of months ago, where I just let artists. I said, here's a one-line prompt. Go write me a story that fits that mold. So it's really nice at this point that I'm sort of we've developed enough of a universe that people want to come play in the world.
So has your um, role as a publisher helped you as with your writing, or vice versa? Your writing helped you, and do your job as a publisher better, more efficiently, or anything like that?
Well, I would say for me, the thing that really helped me the most with both was when I was working in animation many years ago, because I was also the line producer of this series called Horrible Histories. And so I was dealing with budgets, I was dealing with deadlines, I was dealing with all these different component pieces and making sure they all fit together. One of which was also overseeing the writing of the issue. So that was a really good boot camp in how to parse out your time to figure out here's the workflow, here are the different things that you have to do. I would say right now, the push and pull between being a publisher and being a writer is more the publisher Charlie is like, hey, writer Charlie, could you get some more scripts so we can get them going? And writer Charlie's like, I'll get to that. I'm going to be there soon. And he doesn't always deliver on time for publisher Charlie because he's actually wearing publisher Charlie's hat a little bit too much. So I would say as a creative, having control over your own destiny or your own line is a wonderful thing, but it comes with certain responsibilities where you can't just be free to create. You also have to be a businessman. You also have to be a promotion person. And fortunately for me, I know how to do all of those things. But I think for a lot of creatives, it's a really hard balance, which is why some of them are like, ultimately, I just want to be the person who writes,
Mm.
or I just want to be the person who draws. Don't make me wear all these different hats. I kind of enjoy it, but ultimately there is, you can only do so much. You only have so much time. And so it's just trying to figure out where that time is best spent.
Mm. So, talking more specifically about the Kickstarter, what rewards are you offering, or offering for people to entice them to back your project?
So we have the issue, right? It's the next issue. It's a 44-page issue for chapter 8. We have lots of catch-up tiers that are very discounted by Kickstarter standards for catching up, where you get trades, where you get all the issues, where you can catch up on just White Ash. You can catch up on White Ash and Galarian as a bundle. You can catch up as a White Ash universe, which has everything that we've done, which is White Ash, Galarian, the game, How I Slept My Way Through College, and Other Tales from Freshman Year. And again, a big discounted bundle. Specifically in this campaign, We have some really nice variant covers. I personally a little bit more old school in my taste. I think a lot of variant covers today are just pinups, and
Hmm.
that's really nice. And there's some beautiful pinups, but for me, it's a little bit more. I like the covers that tell a story, and so we
Right.
have some covers that I feel like tell stories or tell moments. In particular, we have this great one by Tango, which is a little bit of our ladies' night out variant that's doing really well for us right now. And then we have the preview ashcan for Los Angeles Comic Con. We're also reprinting some previous issues before they were bundled together. Chapter 6 and 7 of the series were in one big 64-page issue. We've run out of that, so I'm reprinting it as 6 and 7 individually. So if you're a completist, you can get those two with the new White Ash Comics imprint trade dressing on it. So, and we try to be very fair with our pricing. On Kickstarter, obviously, comics are a little bit more expensive. And part of that is because it's economy of scale. And if you're a creator and you're trying to create, your print costs are going to be so much higher, your art costs, you don't have a huge line to amortize those costs over. Because we do pretty well, we try to bring the costs down when we can. A lot of our add-ons are fairly cheap by Kickstarter standards. But, in general, pricing in comics, and I know people hate me when I say this because I talk about this a lot, but indie comics are priced too low based on the return that the publishers need to actually make a profit to pay creators when you're
Hmm.
going into comic book shops. I always sort of look at it as like if you look at any other industry, like if you're walking into a wine store or you're getting some beer, there's this huge range of prices for that same 12 ounce or 750 milliliter bottle, right? Depending on quality, depending on vintage. When you walk into a comic shop, every comic is expected to be priced the same as Marvel or DC. It doesn't matter what publisher, because if that indie comic is $8 for 22 pages and that Marvel comic is $5 for 22 pages or $4, people go crazy. But unfortunately, that's kind of more realistic because Marvel prints at such a higher volume in DC than almost any other publisher. Their costs are a fraction to create those issues. So their profit margin is 2 to 3 times what some of the other publishers are putting out. So it just becomes very hard for other publishers to function at those same price points, and particularly the indies. So I kind of look at it as a sliding scale. For me, in the direct market, like if a Marvel book is $4, an IDW book should be $5, a Vault book should be kind of closer to $6 to all create like that same profit margin. And then when you
Hmm.
go to a smaller publisher, now you're looking at like $7 or $8. And if that was the way it was priced, when you got to Kickstarter and saw $10 or $12 for a 22-page book, you'd be like, oh, that makes sense. But I think like when people look at it, it's just sticker shock for some people.
Yeah.
So anyway, like I said, we have some economy of scale, so we do try to keep our prices lower compared to other books on Kickstarter. They're still higher than what you'll find in stores, but like the early bird special on this was $16 for a 44-page issue with cardstock covers. So it's still pretty good.
So having been on, using Kickstarter platform since I think he said 2017,
Yeah.
how have you as a creator and publisher seen the Kickstarter evolve, or I don't evolve or devolve or
No, no,
whatever.
no.
How,
There's been huge changes to Kickstarter. I mean, I would say back in 2017 when I started putting my books out, it was a little bit of the Wild West. For the most part, like there were books that a lot more creators who just never delivered. You had a lot of creators who were only on Kickstarter because they couldn't afford to get a publisher, or their books weren't good enough for a publisher. And finding those gems that you saw, oh my God, this is actually well written, or the art is really good in this book, were few and far between. Jimmy Palmiotti has been on there forever and
Mhm.
been doing like he was one of the first creators who realized, oh wait, I want to own everything I do, so this is the best way to do that. Lady Death, Brian Polito has been doing that for a while also. But outside the two of them, like there were books that I found when I was trying to figure out what to do with White Ash, like this series Skies of Fire. That was just this gorgeous series. and looked as good as any book that you saw in the comic shops, and they were doing it all through Kickstarter. And back in 2016, my choice was, do I try to find a publisher for White Ash, or do I go on Kickstarter? And I started running the numbers in the comic market, because back then you could actually see the numbers because there were sites that kept track of them, and that data was publicly available. And I soon saw that, like, if you as a newer creator wanted to have a series that lasted past, say, 5 issues, the odds were astronomically small that that would happen. And that the only creators who had these hit series, say at Image, which, you know, like would be the ideal place to drop a creator-owned series, were people who had big names, you know, in comics from things they had done before. It was, you know, it was, if you're Brian K. Vaughan and you go to Image, you know you're going to do fine. But like the hits, the people who came out of nowhere, who had a series that lasted past 6 issues, you know, you might have one a year. And so to be that one a year was such a random roll of the dice. And I had this big story I wanted to tell, and that's what sort of brought me to Kickstarter. That said, flash forward to now, the platform has really become the 4th largest sales channel of comics anywhere. You know, in terms of crowdfunding, you've got the direct market, you've got bookstores, you've got the digital webtoons market, and then you have Kickstarter. And it's $1 billion platform that people are selling comics. And the big publishers have realized we're just leaving money on the table. And that's why you see all of them there now. You know, and when you have Neil Gaiman saying, hey, I could take Good Omens to a publisher, or we could put it out ourselves on Kickstarter, you know, that's showing that the platform at this point is now 100% legitimate and a viable path. And so now I have creators who have mostly done direct market comics coming to me and saying, hey, how do I do this Kickstarter thing? Because it seems like maybe this is a better path for me, for my creations, than doing a 4-issue series through whatever publisher, because after that, I'm not going to be able to afford to make it. So it's, I think it's really evolved to the point where it is an industry standard versus that, you know, that cousin that you had sit at the end of the table, and, you know, maybe he would get a little food that was left over at the end of Thanksgiving dinner if he was nice, right? And now he's got like one of the 4 prominent spots at the table. And when people talk about the industry, the crowdfunding market is becoming the biggest thing. So I think for creators, that's a wonderful thing. The flip side of that is, if you are a newer creator, breaking in on Kickstarter right now is so much harder than when I started out, because now the noise that you have to cut through is much louder. The quality of the books that are being put out on Kickstarter is so much higher. So if you want to stand out, if you want to build a brand, you have to make something great, and you have to do it with consistency over time.
So, kind of stepping back from that and looking at the bigger picture, how do you feel that you've grown as a writer over the years, from the start of White Ash until now? And what, if any, advice would you give your younger self, if you could?
Well, I think for my younger self, I would say make the transition to comics a little bit earlier, uh, because I found a lot of success in comics, in the industry. I think, you know, and you know, for a lot of people, they say, "What, are you crazy?" When I say that I find the comic industry very welcoming to new talent. But that's in comparison to the film industry, the animation industry, the television industry, where it's very difficult. So I've been able to make a lot of inroads quickly in comics, whereas all the ground I slowly clawed in film and television took 20 years. And so in terms of like writing specifically, I had been writing professionally for over 20 years before I started doing White Ash. So as a writer, knowing how to tell a story is something that I know how to do. What I think probably now that I'm better at is specifically writing for this form. You know, I've written for animation, I've written for television, I've written lots of different types of films, and each of them has a different cadence, rhythm. I had one job where I was being hired to adapt a Bollywood film for for Hollywood, but it was a rom-com, and so trying to translate the rhythm in the comedy. So I've done a lot of different styles, but I think until you really immerse yourself in a medium, you don't really learn the intricacies of how to best utilize what makes that medium special. So I've become better at the page turns. I've become better at figuring out panel pacing, about reveals, about knowing how to write for different artists. And I think that's a big thing, knowing what this artist might need versus what another one might need. Who needs more information? Who needs less information? And that's honestly just a thing that you develop over time when you work with an artist, as you get a rapport and understand what they need. And so knowing when to be specific and when to be general, I guess is probably something that I've become much better at over the last couple of years.
So, what is the future for White Ash? I mean, is it a limited series that you're planning on, telling, or is it an ongoing? And do you see, you know, using your background and bringing it to other media?
So it's an ongoing series. We have it plotted out for about 60 issues. We have a bunch of miniseries that are in development right now as comics. So
Mhm.
there is a big, big world, a big story that we're looking to tell. And so I would say, as a comic, 5 years from now, you're still going to see White Ash stories coming out. Ideally, 15 years from now, you will still see White Ash stories coming out. In terms of other medium, we are, White Ash has been picked up by a production company, Story Mill. And so we are working on developing a TV series for White Ash right now. But you never know. that's
Mhm.
that's one of those things like that. Having worked in film and television, I know how long that development process is. I know how long the odds are in terms of making it from just being working with a production company to being on
Mhm.
the air. And so I don't ever want to get ahead of myself there. It's wonderful to work with these people. I've written the pilot. I'm attached to be the showrunner for the series if it happens, but we'll see. Right now, for the most part, I'm focused on the comic, making a
Yeah,
great comic
definitely.
and telling the story for years to come. And that's the wonderful thing. And when I talk to my TV writer friends, they're always a little wistful because they create these pilots that are only read by 15 executives, and that's the end of it. If it doesn't get made, no one ever saw it. Whereas I have this world, I'm telling these stories, and we have a fan base that continues to grow. So it's a great place as a creative to be. And the big difference is the amount of money you make making comics versus the amount of money you make, making a TV show.
So, are you reading anything these days that you're really enjoying or think that people should maybe look at?
Ah, what am I reading? Honestly, I haven't had that much time lately. I
Hmm.
back a lot of projects on Kickstarter. I can always give you a couple of great people to always look at. I mean, I always back Jimmy Palmiotti's projects. Carl Kissel, who does Impossible Jones, I really like that world. Ron Randall, who does Trekker. Like those are like some standard bearers that I always pick up. Um, Pat Shand is
Hmm.
on Kickstarter 100 times a week. And he has a wide range of books. Pat and I started around the same time, so we've known each other for a long time. I loved his Destiny New York series. I think that was some of the best indie comics that have been made in the last 15 years. He's still working on that. I think the next volume will be coming out soon. I would say look at Pat's library and see what you love. I will pick up Saga in the trade form when it comes out. I was recently reading some of the old Deadly Class. I have the big Masterworks. I love the layouts for those books. I'm looking forward to, at some point, probably in a year, reading the new Batman. It was a year, Batman and Robin year one. Um,
Yeah.
just because I love the look of the art. I think it'll be a fun, like at this point with me and comics, is as much as I would love to go to the comic shop and pick up the single issues, I just kind of keep an eye on what's coming out, and then if people love it, I'll pick up a trade.
Hmm, okay. So as we kind of wrap up here, would you want to give a final pitch for the Kickstarter and where people can find you on social media?
Sure. Yeah. You can always find me at Charles Stickney on Twitter/X. I'm also at Charlie Stickney and on Blue Sky. White Ash Comics is on Instagram. I think there's a Twitter account for White Ash Comics, and there's a Facebook page for it. So there's all kinds of socials out there. Uh, White Ash is the best grounded modern day fantasy romance set in a coal mining town that you've never read. And you should start reading right now. It's a big epic world. So if you like huge stories with long timelines and plenty of story to dive into, this is a series. The art is incredible. I work with some just killer artists. If you like something a little bit more adult and spicy, we have that with Clarion as well. So we cover all the bases. Come check out what we're doing, and I think you're gonna, you'll be back for the next Kickstarter as well.
Hmm. Well, well, when that happens, we will continue to follow. We'll continue to follow it on and help you get the word out over on Comic Watch, and we'll do the same with this one. And yeah, maybe we'll come back in a couple issues and kind of get a update on how things are going and see where things are in, going, where how they're going and where they're going. I guess I'm
That
trying to
sounds
say.
great. I'd really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you for taking the time to chat with me today. And you can find White Ash and other great projects every Saturday at 12 noon Eastern on comicwatch.com, where I put together a crowdfunding roundup for projects on Zoop and Kickstarter. So we're glad to help you spread the word. And are you besides LA Con, are you doing any shows, or is that kind of your only show?
No, I mean, I do. We have a big booth at San Diego Comic Con. We do Los Angeles Comic Con. I'll be at Comic Con Revolution Ontario, probably at WonderCon next year. So the California conventions, we have it covered. I am hoping in 2025 to start moving, maybe do some East Coast conventions. We'll see. I grew up on the East Coast, so it's about time that I get back.
Well, if you make it over here, or when you make it over here, and if you make it to New York Comic Con, then we'll have to touch base.
I would love that.
All right. Well, we'll be in touch, and thanks again for telling us about White Ash.
Thank you.